Hello, everyone. Hello, YouTubers. It's Anonymous T. Hope you're having an amazing day today. So today I wanted to react to the AHMAUD Arbery trial and the verdict and everything else. And I wanted to read this article from the Washington Post. I will, of course, link it in the description. And it says the following. It says the federal trial of AHMAUD Arbery's killers shows the limits of hate crime laws. These laws express the government's commitment to rooting out racism. Is the message getting through? In criminal trials, it's normally defendants who face the highest stakes, but in the recent federal hate crime prosecution of AHMAUD Arbery's killers, the three defendants had already been convicted of murder under Georgia state law. At stake in this trial was the public's confidence in the justice system's capacity to address racial violence, specifically the murder 2 years ago of an unarmed black man in broad daylight, widely described as a modern-day lynching. On Tuesday morning, the jury reached its verdict, guilty on all counts. This outcome makes it tempting to assume that this case was a slam dunk for prosecutors, especially given how quickly the jury wrapped up its deliberations. But this verdict, representing the first federal hate crime conviction in Georgia's history, was not a foregone conclusion, and though it may provide some relief to Arbery's loved one, this long-awaited conviction also offers a lesson in the inherent limbs of our hate crime laws. To prevail on the hate crime charge, the federal prosecutors needed to convince the 12 jurors beyond a reasonable doubt that the shooting of Arbery was not only a vicious murder, but a vicious murder fueled by racial animus. Whereas the prior state prosecution largely avoided mentioning race, the federal trial centered on it. And the move the federal prosecutors sought to make wasn't easy. They had to turn evidence that the defendants were racist into proof that they targeted Arbery because of his race. An admission of guilt is perhaps the most compelling way to prove subjective motive, but the judge rejected a plea deal amounting to an admission from Travis and Gregory McMichael that their crime was racially motivated. Still, the circumstantial evidence was very strong. Prosecutors introduced dozens of social media posts and text messages full of racist statements, derogatory language, and racial slurs. These included a text message from one of the defendants from a few months before the shooting, commenting that, quote, "We used to walk around committing hate crimes all day." The prosecutor's strongest evidence, however, was that the defendants had spoken up about a desire to kill black people. An acquittal on these facts would have been devastating for the government and a further stain on our legal system. Since federal hate crime trials are exceedingly rare, a loss for the prosecution might have also been taken as a referendum on the efficacy of hate crimes against laws generally. And yet, while these outcomes were avoided, it's unclear that these convictions were an outright win. Instead, this case exposed some serious problems with the design of hate crime laws. Originally enacted by the states in the 1980s and expanded by the federal government in 2009, hate crime laws are intended to be expressive, to send the messages that our country condemns identity-based prejudice and promotes tolerance and equality, and that the government is committed to uprooting racism and other forms of discrimination. Yet the trial and conviction of Arbery's killers raised significant doubts as to whether these intended messages are received by perpetrators, victims, and society more broadly. To send their condemnatory message, hate crime prosecutions are supposed to result in more severe punishment between two crimes that are otherwise identical. One is committed out of racial animus to receive a harsher penalty. However, the more heinous the crime, the less likely a hate crime conviction will meaningfully increase a perpetrator's sentence beyond what they will already receive. This dynamic was clearly on display in the Arbery case. The federal convictions, which could result in maximum sentences of life in prison, will not materially change the defendant's punishment. Travis and Gregory McMichael are already ineligible for parole and will spend the rest of their lives in prison. The third defendant, William Bryan, is not eligible for parole until the age of 82. Hate crime laws are also intended to convey to victims and their families that they're valued and that acts of prejudice against them will not be tolerated. But if from the outset the victim or victim's family feels unsupported by law enforcement, believing that suffering isn't being taken seriously, a hate crime trial years later may not change that. Moreover, because prosecutors consider but are not obligated to follow victims' wishes, even a timely prosecution may achieve a result that's unsatisfying to victims. At a news conference just after the verdict was read, Arbery's mother, Wanda Cooper Jones, recounted how she felt ignored by the Justice Department when, over her staunch objection, prosecutors struck a plea deal instead of going to trial. She lamented, "They didn't hear my cry," concluding, "We got a victory today." But there are so many families out there who don't get victories because of people that we have fighting for us. Hate crime laws are further intended to send a message to society at large, demonstrating the government's commitment to racial equality. Yet a courtroom is a clumsy venue for this sort of norma setting. In the Arbery case, the prosecution prevailed, but as a general matter, the government simply is not in control of the end result. The outcome of a jury trial is never guaranteed. Indeed, hate crime cases rarely go to juries or get charged at all, in part because prosecutors are concerned about jurors' reaction. In my interviews with prosecutors, many explained that they were unlikely to pursue hate crime charges on top of other serious charges because of concerns that hate crime charges are divisive and distracting. As one prosecutor told me, "If we've already asked for a life sentence, better not muddy up the waters and just go with homicide charges." Government prosecutors in the Arbery case were forced to proceed to trial after the judge rejected their plea deal with two defendants. Yet, as Cooper Jones astutely observed, this was atypical. Finally, even a successful hate crime conviction can only do so much to demonstrate the government's commitment to racial equality. Hate crime laws are inherently limited by their reliance on a narrow idea of racism. A narrow idea of racism. Wow. That focuses on individual bad actors, monsters driven by hate. This focus may obscure more pervasive but subtler forms of racial bias. In the case of Arbery's murder and his family's struggle for justice, harms that reach well beyond the abhorrent actions of the three men who killed him, law enforcement's missteps in this case sparked outrage from the start. Body camera footage from the scene of the crime showed a responding officer reassuring Gregory McMichael that he wouldn't put Gregory's son, Travis, in handcuffs. The two state prosecutors originally in charge of the case eventually had to rescue themselves. The first has since been indicted for shielding the defendants. The second initially argued that the defendants had acted legally in self-defense and under Georgia's citizen arrest laws. It took more than 2 months for any arrest to be made, and these arrests occurred only after video of the killing went viral and prosecutors took to the streets. Hate crime laws can't reach those who mishandled and delayed the case, let alone address the racial disparities that plague our criminal justice system more broadly. Yet, in the fight for racial equality, systemic forms of bias warrant special scrutiny precisely because they're more widespread and less visible than egregious crimes of racial violence. The good news is that Arbery's killers were convicted of the hate crime they obviously committed. An acquittal in this case would have been an intolerable failure of justice, but even these convictions in their own way raise hard questions about the value of hate crime laws. So there it is, you guys. For me, it's like we shouldn't be celebrating that finally, there's a conviction, and we always have to be mindful too that even though a conviction took place, we still have the federal sentencing. Even though these men are going to be in jail for life, we still need to see life sentences take place, with these federal hearings, to make sure it's clear, make sure there's no possibility, that there's even an opportunity for them to come out of jail. So there's that, you guys. What did you guys think of the verdict? Are you shocked at the verdict? I think it's more disturbing that this is the first time that hate crime, has gone this way in Georgia. That is very disturbing and tells you everything that you need to know. Tells you everything you need to know. But we still have a long way, you guys. We still have a long way because racism is more active and alive than it's ever been. I think just because people are trying to compare, the fact that we're not slavery anymore, but we are still enslaved in different ways in a modern sense in 2022, and it needs to stop. The, disparities and the mistreatment and the discrimination and the prejudice, all of it needs to stop. And so we will see what happens with ultimately the sentencing, and we will also see, what ends up happening in future cases and in future situations, if this sends a message enough for people to stop it, or if we are going to be back here again with yet another unfortunate story of an innocent black man losing his life to some racists. So let me know your guys' thoughts. What did you guys think of the verdict? Like I said, I'm holding out until we get to the sentencing. Even though I already know that they're going to be in jail, for life, you still need to send the message in the federal court that this is not going to be tolerated. Just a guilty verdict is not enough for me. We need to give them the maximum sentence that you can give, on top of their other sentences. So there is no possibility for them to even have an opportunity, even if they're 100 years old, to come out of jail. So that is the thoughts that I have. Please let me know what you guys think. Please do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you're notified the moment I post new content on my channel. And with that being said, I will talk to you guys again very soon.